Hello everyone and welcome to another lesson in the Elizabethan England course. This is my favourite lesson, favourite topic of the whole course is the Spanish Armada. So in this lesson we're going to look at why the Spanish Armada came and why it failed. Alright, so 1588 is the end of our course if you're looking at this from the Edexcel course. So a nice end to what has been, hopefully, a quite enjoyable course for you. So let's get started then and be thinking about a little bit what's happened so far in this course that might have led to Philip sending the Armada. So pause the video and then when you're ready, if you're writing this on a Google Doc or in your book or whatever you're making your notes, unpause when you're ready and then come back to the lesson. Okay, so perhaps one of the most obvious reasons you might be thinking is Mary Queen of Scots. Elizabeth just killed Mary Queen of Scots after the fourth plot, the Babington plot. So that's quite an obvious one. However, I would urge a little bit of caution there due to the fact that Mary Queen of Scots her death was 1587, and it's probably clear if you think back to the Treaty of Joinville, possibly that's what you've written down in your notes, where France and Spain joined together, that the Armada was coming anyway, it was inevitable. So instead of saying that Mary Queen of Scots was possibly a reason for the Armada, I think it's probably more likely to be a motivation of Philip avenging her death, perhaps. So it's very clear that the Armada was coming anyway. So the previous things we can think about really are Sir Francis Drake's actions, attacking Spanish ships, the sea beggars, the indirect intervention in the Netherlands, having Elizabeth holding Mary Queen of Scots under house arrest all this time, the religious reasons, Philip might want to turn England Catholic again, the counter-reformation that's been going on since the 60s. So hopefully you've got a nice list of things that may well be a reason for the Armada. We'll have a little look at a few now, and then we'll have a little look at a model answer as well during this lesson, just to get your heads sorted on a good answer for a quite good topic if we were to get this in our exam. Alright, so causes are the straightforward bit, the most memorable bits hopefully, and then we'll get on to the reasons why it failed. A little bit more tricky, but still I think once you get your notes sorted, quite straightforward as well. Alright, so this little diagram is a little summary of the main probable reasons for the Armada coming. So we've got religion, the counter-reformation as we've said, they've got provocation, like Elizabeth provoked Philip, if you like. We've talked about this at length as well in this relationship breakdown. Who's to blame for the relationship breakdown? Is it Elizabeth? Is it Philip? Is it the Pope? Who knows, really? There's not probably a specific answer because everyone's got a slightly different interpretation. But you can see there in the purple box some reasons why we might have provoked Philip into sending the Armada. And then obviously in the orange box is the politics of the thing, the Treaty of Joinville, the Treaty of Nonsuch. These are formal political alliances that have essentially sent both England and Spain officially on a collision course and officially at war with each other. Despite all the years of Elizabeth trying to put off a war, the 1584, 1585, 1586, around that period, lots of things happened. The assassination of William of Orange, the death of Anjou, all sorts of stuff. So the war was probably inevitable. The invasion was inevitable. And then the green box, you see other circumstances, other context around. Spain has acquired Portugal, which is now more powerful and wealthy than it's probably ever been. So it now feels it's in a position to attack England, perhaps. Spain's success in the Netherlands, again, has built their confidence. England's sort of hesitation to help out in the Netherlands and limited success, you could say, might have convinced Philip that England was particularly weak. So all of these issues on this screen now will be good reasons for the causes. Perhaps you could maybe pause the video, have a look at it, and then try and write them again off memory, or use them as we prepare for our little model answer in a sec. Okay, so let's move on a little bit to, again, work on some consolidation, some revision of this little topic. So if you are watching it for the first time, then make your notes on this little diagram as I talk you through each little circle. But if you are using it as revision, then you should be able to hopefully have a go straight away. So just pause the video and annotate as much as you can from these dual coding, if you like, these images that might hopefully trigger some knowledge. So just another little summary of the causes. We'll start off at the top with Elizabeth refusing to marry Philip of Spain. Obviously, at the beginning of Elizabeth's reign, Philip offered to marry Elizabeth, hoping that he could continue essentially as King of England, probably keep England Catholic. Elizabeth rejected him. I don't know if that's quite a reason to go to war, and it was quite a long time back. But you never know. A man embarrassed to be rejected, that could certainly have some motivation perhaps later on. Whether or not that's the main cause is highly doubtful, as it was 30 years previous. So then if we move along the rope a little bit to the second picture, which is Elizabeth's encouraging pirates to attack Spanish ships. So this circle here should hopefully be triggering your knowledge of Drake's actions in the New World, attacking the Spanish colonies, stealing £400,000 in 1580, bringing that back. Elizabeth knighting him publicly, which was essentially just a humiliation on top of anger, rubbing salt in the wounds really for Drake stealing all that money. And of course he'd stolen 40 grand previously in the 70s and just keeps attacking Spanish ships. And remember Drake's raid on Cadiz. So Drake is absolutely not Philip's favourite person, and that is a definite reason why we end up in this war, why the Armada comes, and why relationships break down. And we've said this previously during the Drake's lessons. Just make sure you are so secure on your Drake knowledge, because it can fit any question. Break down relations, Armada, as a really good reason why the Armada came. So get your head around all of those Drake stories and facts. And then move on to the third circle down the rope. So the fuse is going very, very close here to war, would be the whole religious reason. So the Counter-Reformation, Philip is on his way to turn England Catholic and remove Elizabeth, the heretic, working for the Pope. We know all the bits and bobs that have been happening in England, priests being smuggled in. There's definitely an effort, isn't there, to turn England back to Catholic, and it's not a secret. So sending the Armada seems like the most obvious way to do this. So that would be a good reason as well. And then the fourth circle, and this would be another secure paragraph once you've got your head around the Netherlands, the indirect intervention and the direct intervention. So you want to be thinking here about the sea beggars, the Genoese loan, Casimir, the volunteers going into the Netherlands to help the Dutch Protestants in the 1560s. Now all of those things, Elizabeth could argue, weren't her, although Philip is probably quite convinced that they were. However, remember that indirect intervention, because Elizabeth was trying really hard not to go to war. We can't afford to go to war at this time. The army and supplies and resources aren't very good. So all of those early interventions were just a bit of a niggle for Philip, allowing the sea beggars to attack Spanish ships, encouraging her privateers to attack Spanish colonies, all of which in a weird vain attempt to take away some resources from the Netherlands and take some pressure off, hoping that Philip would just leave. And of course that didn't happen, and as the war goes on, or the Netherlands problem goes on, by 1584 and then 85, the Treaty of Joinville, which then leads to the Treaty of Nonsuch, where Elizabeth officially and directly intervenes in the Netherlands. Philip could see this as a reason for sending the Armada, is that he sees it as an absolute declaration of war, which it quite clearly is. She promises to help the Dutch, and she sends 7,400 troops into the Netherlands with Leicester leading the charges. And as we know from that topic, it didn't go particularly well, but Elizabeth could quite clearly be blamed here for provoking Philip by sending in an army led by Leicester. Or you could argue that Elizabeth was just reacting to the Treaty of Joinville. Again, that's the whole nice part of this topic, is that depending on your viewpoint on who's to blame for which, you can't really be wrong. Just lots of facts to prove your particular view. And then we end our small little cartoon here, the fuse, getting to Mary Queen of Scots. As we've just mentioned earlier in this lesson, it's really hard to say that Mary Queen of Scots is the reason for the Armada. It has quite clearly been coming before, particularly as the fact that, remember, that Drake has raided Cadiz and burnt down the fleet that was being built there. All of that was before Mary Queen of Scots, so she is going to be the motivation, I think, for the Armada, for avenging her death, but certainly not a cause of it, in my opinion. Okay, so hopefully this little diagram here, however you presented it, you can pause the video and rewind that, obviously, if you missed a little bit of what I've just said, but these are the nice little ways that we can do some revision that would take 25 minutes, a really effective way to revise something specific and small, but really important, and build that up over time to maybe doing an essay question as well. Alright, so we'll crack on a little bit now into this lesson, having thought about the causes of it. How might this look in your exam? So we can see two questions on the screen now. One is a 12 marker and one is a 16 marker. Hopefully by now you are well and truly confident in what the differences are. 12 marker is just simply 3 paragraphs, 3 reasons why something happened. This is the same for paper 1 and paper 3. In this case, explain why Philip launched the Armada in 1588. You'll get 2 bullet points as always with this, so it could be Drake, it could be religion, could be whatever. You can choose whatever 3 reasons you want. Or if it was a 16 marker, it would be a statement. and it'll say the actions of Sir Francis Drake were the main cause of the Spanish Armada. How far do you agree? And of course you'll get 2 bullet points again. Again, it could be religion, it could be all sorts of things. The Netherlands, the Pope, the Counter-Reformation, I don't know, all sorts of things. The essence of your answer remains the same though, those 3 paragraphs in the middle. The big difference in the 16 marker is you need your judgment, so I agree to a larger extent, or I disagree to a larger extent, and of course you need your conclusion. And then within that 16 marker, remember you are constantly comparing whatever paragraph you choose to do after Sir Francis Drake, because he's in the question, he has to be paragraph 1. Make sure you compare him back to Drake. Why more or less important than Drake? Things like, if it wasn't for, then this wouldn't have happened, and so forth. So let's have a little look now at a model answer. But before we do, look at the question on the screen now. Perhaps pause the video, see how confident you're feeling on some of that revision that we've just done. Maybe you can either do a bit of revision and then come and answer this question before continuing the video, or watch the rest of the lesson and make sure you do this question at some point. Securing your knowledge on the Spanish Armada, remember, will be really, really beneficial. So however you want to do it, either pause the video and go and do some work and then write this answer, then come back and I'll take you through my model answer for this question. So in this question, the 2 bullet points we've got are the Netherlands. And if you look at the date of this question, there isn't a specific date range. It literally is by 1588, which means we can talk about the whole course. Please be very, very careful when you look at a question like this, because it may say something like 1585 to 88. That's really harsh, but it could happen. So make sure you understand the date range, whereas in this question, we can talk about anything in the whole course. So indirect intervention and direct intervention, Drake's attacks on Spanish colonies, Drake's actions generally across the whole course, and then your third paragraph that you might choose, I feel like an obvious one would be religion, the Counter-Reformation. Okay, so I'm going to reveal paragraph 1, 2 and 3 now of my model answer. So when you're ready, press play and continue with this lesson. Okay, so paragraph 1, you can have a little read of there. Pause the video and read it. If you've got any questions or any queries about this paragraph, just write them down and let us know. Otherwise, hopefully you'll be able to see your point, evidence, explanation, and you're linking back to the question. We're looking for 3 facts, aren't we, within each paragraph at least. I think this is a pretty strong paragraph. It's got a lot of detail in there. Whether or not you can produce this in the, 15 to 18 minutes, hopefully you can. But if we can get somewhere close to this, then that's really good. Perhaps that could even be a thing that you try to do now. Have a read of it and then try and write it in, 7 minutes, because you're going to have 3 paragraphs to do. See how you get on. Obviously, it doesn't need to be word for word perfect. And then when you're ready, carry on to paragraph 2. So this is your point is obvious. One reason why Philip launches the Armada is because of the Netherlands. Okay, and then paragraph 2. Another reason Philip launches the Armada was because of the actions of Francis Drake. So now this paragraph is going to be all about Sir Francis Drake, nothing else but Drake. But remember to keep on saying, why did that lead to Philip sending the Armada? And in most cases when it comes to Drake, it's about provoking him, about making Philip angry, and Philip maybe seeking out some sort of revenge. So again, pause the video, have a read of this paragraph. Again, if you have any issues with it, let us know, and then continue to paragraph 3 when you are ready. Right, and the final paragraph of this 12 marker starts, obviously, another reason, or a final reason you could say, that Philip launched the Spanish Armada was because of religion. So now this whole paragraph should be about the Counter-Reformation, Philip trying to turn England Catholic again, a little bit of backstory, perhaps the religious roller coaster, support from the Pope, the plots maybe. All sorts of things can be in this paragraph, so that's quite a useful one. So as we've said, pause, have a little read, and then when you're ready, we will continue with the lessons looking at why the Armada failed. Okay, so hopefully having a read through that gives you a good idea of what a pretty good Spanish Armada causes essay might look like. Remembering to add those 3 paragraphs together in a 16 marker would be generally the same, but your intro and conclusion would be different. But also you need to be comparing directly to whatever's in the question. In this case, I think Sir Francis Drake would be the focus. Is it more or less important than him? Okay, so how I think you should do your notes now as you're watching this lesson is in the middle of a bit of paper on your Google Doc. This little diagram is quite nice. So just put off details or facts from each of the circles that you think it relates to. So we clearly see that we've got 6 reasons why the Armada failed. And we'll just add a little bit of detail as we go through this lesson to each of them. And then we'll try and turn that into some sort of formal work that could easily be translated into an exam question. All right, so why did the Armada fail? We've got English tactics, poor communication between the Duke of Parma and the Armada. The Armada was poorly supplied, we'll talk about that. Superior English ships, remember Hawkins' new ship design. The weather is going to be a huge reason for why it failed, which of course is in nobody's power except God, perhaps. And Elizabeth was maybe a little bit better than Philip at listening to the experts in what not to do. So the first thing to consider really when it comes to this Armada is to keep in the context that Elizabeth and England should not have won this Armada in any way, shape or form. The Spanish Armada, the fleet, is massive compared to England's fleet. Just the quality of the Spanish Armada, the power and the might to come and face little England. Although England is a little bit wealthier than it has been in the previous course, thanks to some of that money from Drake, it really should not be winning this Armada. The fact that it does is not only just fascinating, but also really brilliant. Historically, goes a long way to showing why Elizabeth is known as Gloriana, perhaps the greatest monarch England's ever had. All right, so that's just a little bit of backstory from me, really, just how exciting this is to think about how England managed to defeat this massive enemy. All right, so the enterprise for England is what this is known as. You may see this in some of your books or textbooks or on the internet when you're doing some other revision. The enterprise for England. That just means Philip is coming for England. So I'm going to put a little bit of Spanish on here, just for fun, really. See if you can work out what Philip's plan is for the enterprise for England. Write your answer in your Google Doc or wherever you're making your notes. And of course, I'll give you the English in a minute, but just pause the video and have a little read of that. See if you can just work it out for a bit of fun. And then when you're ready, unpause the video and we'll see the English version, just to give you a little bit of an idea about what Philip's plan is. Okay, so hopefully you managed to get a good little crack at that. It's interesting how the brain can somehow work a lot of that out. So in English, what Philip's plan is, he's going to build 130 ships with nearly 2,500 guns and cannons, 30,000 soldiers. He's going to sail along the English Channel to the Netherlands. He's going to pick up the Duke of Parma with another 27,000 soldiers, then sail to Kent, then on to London. When he's in London, he's going to depose Elizabeth and change England into Catholicism. Easy, simple plan. So what I'd like you to do, please, is pause the video and just summarise that. Make sure, however you do, that you get your head around the plan. It is very simple. Sometimes execution of these things are where it goes a little bit wrong. All right, so that's the plan. Of course, he believes that God is going to support him as well. God is Catholic, clearly. And interestingly as well, Elizabeth will believe that God is going to support her. So now we'll see what side God is on with the outcome of this. Is God Protestant or is God Catholic? That sounds a really silly thing to say, isn't it? When we've talked about how they're both Christian, but at the time, this is how they viewed the situation. All right, so just to add a little bit of a note here about this guy, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, he has been put in charge of the Armada by Philip. He is a great soldier, very well respected, but he's not a sailor. Medina Sidonia, in fact, even himself, I believe, begged Philip not to put him in charge of the Armada, and this proved to be fatal, as we'll see going through the rest of this lesson. He spent more of his time being sick over the bulkhead of his boats, couldn't command it. When things went wrong, when the weather went wrong, Medina Sidonia was just in no position to do this. And this is possibly a good reason to consider why the Armada failed, is this arrogance of Philip, that he believed he was just going to sail up the English Channel. He didn't need sailors so much on his ships. He filled his ships a lot with a lot of soldiers, in the intention that you're going to get some more soldiers, nip over the English Channel, get to Kent. Then, of course, you don't need sailors when you are on land. However, he's clearly underestimated Elizabeth, Drake and Walter Raleigh, and everything else about the English defence of the English Channel. So Medina Sidonia is going to play quite a significant part in why it fails. Just keep in mind he's not a sailor. So when those things start going wrong, when the storms come, when the anchors are put down, then you start making mistakes. But again, this will come back to a point about Elizabeth was better at listening to the experts, whereas Philip was less willing to listen to them, and he gave instructions of what he wanted to happen. Overconfidence? I don't know. But you can make up your own mind on this as the story goes on. So Elizabeth's response, she obviously is concerned completely. This massive armada is now our turn. We've seen what the Spanish have done in the Netherlands with the Spanish Inquisition. I think probably deep down Elizabeth always knew at some point this threat would be coming to England, and here we are 30 years after she started as Queen. It's on its way. So she says Philip thinks it's going to be easy. His ships are going to lead us to victory, blah, 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 blah. We have got a little secret weapon, though. Remember John Hawkins' design of his ship, smaller, more maneuverable, more nimble, particularly in a storm, perhaps, and particularly within a small body of water like the English Channel is, and, of course, the galleons and the guns on rails. So Elizabeth's feeling quite confident that we can at least compete in that sense, but still, they have a massive armada of 130. It really still is going to be an easy duck shoot for the Spanish. So that's what Elizabeth's thinking, probably more in hope than anything else. And of course, she's hoping God will help too. So let's have a little think about this in a bit more focus on specific reasons. And there's a technicality, or the way that you say this, if you say, why did Spain lose, or why did England win? Because both clearly are the same thing. But actually, when we look at it, why did Spain lose in your answer, your essay, and just for your own understanding, this is things that Spain did. All right, as opposed to things that England did. This could be anything from, if you're a football fan, you watch a game of football, why did one team lose? Was it tactical genius from the other team? Was it a poor performance from the defence of that team? Clearly, your interpretation of how you view these things aligns your view. So let's just try and summarise this with your notes now. Back to your little circles if that's how you're doing it. A little subtitle of why Spain lost. And this example, firstly, is Spanish ships. Now, this would obviously be a paragraph where you'd say one reason why the Armada lost was due to Spanish tactics or Spanish ships or whatever it might be. So firstly, with the Spanish ships, Philip has got a collection of ships from across his empire, from Portugal, from South America, from Spain. Big ships, small ships, all sorts of ships really, that isn't ideal. And the reason why he's had to get this sort of hodgepodge amount of ships is because Drake burnt down those at Cadiz, the new ships that they were building ready for this armada. So Philip has had to sort of scurry around a little bit, hopefully you can understand that, and take a load of ships from around in his empire. It still gives them loads, 130 in total, but the quality of them, some are old. The cannons, you'll see a problem with this shortly. Some of the cannons got jammed, they were too big for the cannons in the ships. Whereas Elizabeth, as we'll talk about in a minute, our English cannons, they were all made in the same mould, so they're all the same size. Just everything seemed to be technically better on the English. So sometimes it's not all about numbers, is it? It's about what happens on the day. I suppose that's why sometimes in a football match, a team with a couple of red cards could still technically win by being a bit more tactically superior. So this is one reason to talk about why this went wrong, is that Medina Sidonia is in charge of this thing. He's not a sailor at the best of the times. So how is he going to be managing all of these different kinds of ships? So that's one bullet point to think about. They've got more priests on their ships than gunners. I don't know if this is particularly dramatic in a way of saying this, but Philip did fill his ships with priests and soldiers. Similarly, for the same reason, this overconfidence, this arrogance, that he felt the soldiers were going to get to England really quickly, sail up the channel with minimal fuss, and then of course the priests are on the boat to start converting all these Protestants as they make their way to London. So again, underestimated England, overconfidence, but he's filled his ship full of priests. Now, there's a lot of praying going on when things start going wrong, I suppose. The soldiers don't know what they're doing, and of course Medina Sidonia doesn't. So hopefully we're starting to build up quite a nice little story here as to why the Spanish lost the Armada. The ships, as we've said, are carrying the soldiers. This is simply so that they could just easily get up to England and march through the country, killing anyone in their way and getting to Elizabeth, as well as loads of supplies for when they get there for the counter-reformation, probably for Philip's great arrival and coronation. All of this is in their plan. Again, we're going to be arguing in this question when it starts getting bad, so during the storm, this is when these problems that you're looking at now become a bigger issue. So they've got 1,000 guns of all different sizes, as we've said. Lots of them are too big, so they caused all sorts of problems with the balance of the ships. As we've said, the cannonballs got stuck, so they jammed. Obviously, you're taking out your firepower there, and that again comes to be a bit of a problem when they're on these one-to-one battles once the shape has been destroyed by the weather. Also, they're relying on this idea of getting to the Netherlands. Probably, despite the shortcomings of Medina Sidonia and the things that are going wrong with the soldiers and the cannons, had they made it to the Netherlands and picked up those 27,000 extra people, I really believe they still would have won this. A little bit messier than perhaps they wanted to, but they still would have. And you'll see in a sec that that's one of the reasons why it fails. Another reason, just poor communication from Medina Sidonia to the Duke of Parma in the Netherlands. In the end, long story short, they don't make it to the Netherlands in time. And that's when Elizabeth and her boats are able to attack a little bit more easily. And then the storm obviously is going to help as well. So Medina Sidonia, poor decisions all the way through. Didn't get messages to the Duke of Parma quick enough. As well as the thing that we can consider back to Cadiz. Although Drake burnt down a lot of his ships, he also, on the way home, remember, stopped off on Portugal and attacked some of these key Spanish ports and took all their barrels and things. So as well as having a load of bad ships, wrong size, all of the barrels with the crew's food and drink on, they were old. What they had to find old ones, not these new ones. So the food started to rot. They were at sea for much longer than they anticipated being. So this then started affecting the morale of the crew. They were hungry. They wanted to go home. 10 weeks at sea with food not going so well and drinks not going so well. And then Medina Sidonia, of course, not really knowing how to work with all of these problems. You can clearly see, hopefully, why the Spanish Armada failed in 1588. Okay, so then we think about another little reason. So that would be paragraph 1 there, the Spanish ships and supplies, resources perhaps. So continuing on with that, we've said we're not supplied as well supplied as they should have been, thanks to the Drake's raid on Cadiz. These barrels were destroyed, so anything that should be perishable would last a little bit longer if the barrels were pretty good, but they weren't. Of course, weather is going to play a part, but has played a part even up to this stage. They're at sea for 10 weeks longer than they planned to be because they couldn't leave or port. A lot of decisions happened to be made that if it was a sailor in charge, an experienced sailor, then perhaps, and more likely, probably, better decisions would have been made, perhaps when they set sail. Maybe even, might have been a bit embarrassing, but perhaps even a sailor might have thought, let's come back to Spain and go again at another point, but fully supplied. So those are the kind of decisions that perhaps went wrong on the day. All right, and then the cannonballs, not only were they jamming the boats, but they weren't even good quality either. So when they were fired, the damage was limited, much more minimal than it would be if these cannonballs were strong. All in all, hopefully, what we've talked about so far in this bit of the lesson, you are clearly painting a picture now as to why the Spanish lost in regards to ships and supplies. One big paragraph, perhaps the two mini subheadings could be, and then we could think about why the English won. All right, so just to bring this to a bit of a logical end, as far as why did Spain lose, the communication that we've talked about, remember they were supposed to pick up the Spanish fleet in the Netherlands, but they didn't have the deep sea ports to be able to get all of their armada there. This is a really tiny link. Remember we talked about when Leicester went to the Netherlands after the Treaty of Nonsuch, and the only real success, apart from the total humiliation for Leicester and Elizabeth in that little invasion, was that Leicester managed to keep hold of the deep waters of the English Channel. That's now where this proves a bit of luck, probably more than anything else. But the Spanish could not get to the deep seaports, which meant it was harder to get to the the Spanish in Holland. Longer preparation time for that. Communication was by sea, so really slow. You're going to have to send small lifeboats almost to the Netherlands with your letters and your notes, trying to communicate where are we, when will we be there, and so forth. So that took about a week really to get a message to the coast, to Parma and his men. Most of the time by this point the Spanish they're facing some sort of rebellion, aren't they, in the Netherlands? So the Spanish soldiers, they're hiding in the dikes of Amsterdam, and even then, even when they get there, if they get there in time, it's going to take another 48 hours to get ready to then attack England. So all of this is absolutely vital and pivotal into why it lost. In this 48 hours, when they do finally reach an area where they might have been able to communicate a bit better, is where we have the battle, the main battle of the Armada, which we'll talk about very shortly in this lesson, the Battle of Gravelines. But of course, then the storm comes, so the weather wipes out tactics, and then the English react beautifully with some of the things they're going to do to help win this Armada. So partly, you could almost feel a little bit sorry for Medina Sidonia. Everything that could possibly go wrong seems to have gone wrong for the Spanish. And again, like I just said a minute ago, perhaps a better commander might have taken his fleet home to come another day, but that didn't happen, so possibly that's a main reason why it failed. So what I think would be a good idea for you now, having to talk about those things, is to pause the video and go and write a paragraph, a perfect paragraph, about why the Armada failed, looking at Spanish ships, tactics and resources, and communication. So you might start this thing with, on the one hand, as if it was a 16 marker, the Armada failed due to Spanish tactic ships or whatever, and just write in as good a paragraph as you can. Obviously, rewind the video or go back through the video to remind you what I've said. Maybe your notes, add a little bit of notes to them, but just I feel like it would make sense as we go through the lesson to really secure your knowledge in the context of what it would look like in an exam question. And then of course you'll have some paragraphs written perfect for the end of this topic. By that you'll only need to do one final paragraph, and then of course the night before your exam you read these very strong answers in your notes, in your books, or wherever you've written them. So the Armada, you know, we've seen other model answers in other lessons online. Just make sure you get your head around the gist of what it is that you want to say in these questions, because really, once you've nailed them, especially in the Elizabeth course, a little bit different to some of the other ones perhaps, but those 12 markers, that knowledge, those 3 paragraphs really do translate and transfer really nicely to other topics as well. So pause the video, go and have a go at this paragraph. When you're ready, unpause and we'll carry on to look at why England won. Alright, welcome back. So why did England win the Spanish Armada as opposed to Spain losing? Obviously that we're all going to be really pro-English here, aren't we? Good old Elizabeth, Drake, Raleigh and Hawkins. But actually, as history goes, this is one where we do absolutely need to give some credit to the tactics of the English. Alright, so the first sort of subtitle of this overall paragraph would be the English ships, the technology on the ships. And we're linking back a little bit to Hawkins, what we did when we were looking at why did people go abroad, and how did the ship design and technology help. So we can remind ourselves the cannons, they were on smaller gun rails, so the recoil, when they were recoiled, obviously as you know, a cannon fires, it goes back into the bow of the ship. It then needs to be pushed back through the cannon holes to fire again. Our English ships can be pushed back on rails much quicker than the Spanish can reload theirs. 6 times quicker is probably your fact for that. That's how much quicker we can fight and fire the Spanish. Obviously our ships, remember, are going to be much smaller, so we can turn quicker. So the turn and circle is much easier to get back and fire again, 6 times quicker. Bear in mind as well the weather, the storm. That's going to prove a little bit costly for the Spanish ships and their massive galleons stuck in the English Channel. Almost they become like sitting ducks. Alright, so when we are firing and reloading these things, it takes a lot less men as well. We've obviously got sailors on our ships, led by good commanders at sea, as we've seen over the last couple of lessons, with Drake and Hawkins and Raleigh. England is becoming quite a strong seafaring nation. This navy that becomes obviously one of the greatest navies in the world, leading towards the British Empire and things like that. This is the roots of all of that. So we've actually got sailors on board that make good decisions, as opposed to Medina Sidonia. The ships can fire more cannonballs, as we've said, 6 times quicker, meaning that we've got that advantage, especially when we break the crescent shape. And you'll see the Spanish crescent shape in a minute. As long as those Spanish ships stay together, then we're really in trouble, because no matter what we do, no matter how small, nimble and manoeuvrable our ships are, if the Spanish Armada remains in that massive crescent shape, then it doesn't really matter. We'll probably still lose. They'll engulf us, surround us, and that will be the end of that. So you'll see how that works out in a sec as well. And Hawkins' tactics, this is really important. Almost a bit like, I don't know, a sort of guerrilla type warfare, but on the water. Is Hawkins was to be quick, nimble, attack and leave. So just sort of jab a little bit, as if you can imagine a boxer just jabbing. Just essentially putting the Spanish Armada off its course, making it make decisions that it possibly wasn't planning to do. Obviously, to get to the Netherlands was its main objective, to pick up the other 27,000. So these little tactics of sort of in and attack and out, it's not doing a lot of damage, but it's making Medina Sidonia make decisions that perhaps he didn't really want to do. And that's much easier because the ships, our English ships, are much more nimble to get in and out as well. So a little bit of chasing. We're going to start harrying up the Spanish, up the English Channel, making Medina Sidonia do stuff that he probably didn't want to do. In fact, probably didn't know what to do. Alright, so continuing this a little summary of what we've just talked about. For your notes, perhaps you could just add this, pause the video and add it, but I think we've talked about this. Our ships are better designed, the guns take up less space, they're quicker to fire, they're on rails, we can change directions much quicker, and we're a little bit faster than those Spanish ships. due to the sail design, the triangular sail, all those things that we've talked about previously has given us a bit of an advantage, but we still should not be winning this Armada despite this, just for the sheer number of the Spanish. Okay, so the next thing to consider is for maybe the next paragraph, if you like, on why England won. But it's important before we do that to consider that we've only got 24 of our new ships Hawkins designed. They've got 130, and they may well be bigger and, you know, a little bit older and that kind of thing, but 130 versus 24 hopefully gives you a bit of an idea about what I'm trying to say. So, tactics then. This becomes much, much more important than perhaps just having faster, smaller ships with better guns. So the Armada was spotted in the Channel, and as we've said, Hawkins was very keen on quick attacks, chasing and harrying, which basically allowed two of the ships very quickly to be lost. Maybe Medina Sidonia starts thinking that, we weren't expecting this, we were expecting just to sail quite casually up the Channel. Here we are, we've been attacked, we've been sort of chased and harried a little bit at Plymouth before we even get close really to getting up the English Channel towards the Netherlands. Maybe things are not quite going as planned for Medina Sidonia. We also, as we've said, keep this safe distance, attack and get back. So we're chasing the Spanish into the narrow channel, which is obviously better for smaller ships. So if you've been on one of the ferries across to France, I know that some of us have on our trips in the last couple of years, you'll know the English Channel is not a massively wide body of water. So with having 130 Spanish galleons in there, it's going to be much more difficult for them to manoeuvre to get into deeper waters. So the fact that we're chasing them and harrying them, I think is a really great tactic from Hawkins and is going to prove pivotal in the whole defeat of the Spanish Armada. A little bit of luck as well, perhaps, with the weather, but some would argue that you make your own luck, don't you? So the Armada had hoped to anchor off the Isle of Wight and just wait for Palmer being chased, but of course they couldn't because the English were straight in, chased them away, so they couldn't put their anchors down. Just a little spelling mistake there for Palmer, should be P-A-R. I don't think it would matter too much though if you wrote P-A-L, just as a mistake. So just keep that in mind. This Hawkins raid, attack and get away and chase and chase and chase, is linked directly to the fact that Medina Sidonia couldn't do what he was told to do, even though he's the leader. He was probably given some advice, I'd imagine, and if this happens, do this. Try and get to the Isle of Wight, anchor, recuperate, get your men fed or whatever. But, of course, we didn't allow it. So that's a thing to think about in this, okay? So, tactic-wise, the English tactics are really good. I still believe at this stage, though, that Spain should have won. All right, so let's have a little look at this specific battle. The most famous battle, really, of the whole Spanish Armada. You know, when we talk about World War I and we think of the Battle of the Somme or the Battle of Verdun or Passchendaele, this is the Battle of the Spanish Armada, the Battle of Gravelines. So for spelling of that, think grave lines. So you can see in this painting of the Spanish Armada, the crescent formation. Essentially, that's probably what's equipped them and allowed them to take over South America, to build that huge empire over in the Americas. You can see it would almost engulf anything inside of it, and the cannons would just pick off anything. So that is the danger for England, is they need to somehow break up this formation. So the Battle of Gravelines is where that's going to happen. And partly luck, partly good tactics, partly some judgment, or just maybe God was Protestant after all. All right, so if that was the case, what would you do? If you're the captain of the English fleet and you see this Armada crescent shape coming towards you, what would you do? So pause the video, go and write your notes on that, come up with a bit of a tactic, what you do, and then come back to the video, press play, and then we'll see just what happened. Okay, so welcome back. Let's have a little look at the Battle of Gravelines. So we'll need to look at this for a couple of perspectives now. Obviously some knowledge for the weather and the English fire ships, but also it could be a question one, describe one feature of the Battle of Gravelines, blah, 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 blah. So take the details and the story of it and try and get your head familiarised with that too, because it could be a nice little question one to get us into it, but also really useful factual knowledge for our paragraph. So the Battle of Gravelines, the English decided to send 8 empty fire ships into the Armada's crescent shape. Now, because of the storm, you've got to remember the storm has meant that Medina Sidonia has put his anchors down, which leaves the Armada in that crescent shape a little bit vulnerable. So out of our very small fleet, they decide to empty them and set them on fire, which causes havoc. Now these fire ships sail towards the Armada. The anchors have gone down. Medina Sidonia now doesn't know what to do. He's panicking. The Spanish Armada is full of priests and soldiers. No one really knows what's going on right in the middle of this storm. So Gravelines, just obviously off the coast of Northern Europe, this is the end for the Spanish Armada. And this is where those tactics are going to come in quite handy, because obviously this is going to split up the Armada, and you're going to be able to then have one-to-one battles, which is going to really help with the smaller ships, the 6 times quicker firing. Hopefully all of that now makes perfect sense. But really, it's only because of the weather, because had the weather not been so bad, they wouldn't have put their anchors down, which wouldn't have allowed them to be vulnerable to these fire ships. But then you also could argue that it was genius of the English to react to that situation and send these 8 fire ships in. Now, no one was particularly killed by the Spanish because of these fire ships. Didn't do a huge amount of damage to the fleet, but what it did do is it split up the crescent-shaped formation, allowing for some of those one-to-one battles. So by the time the Armada was regrouping itself there, it's now fighting without the Duke of Parma, again with an R instead of an L, because they didn't make it to the Netherlands. So this is where I was saying before that despite everything else that's gone wrong for Medina Sidonia, I think had he got to the Netherlands, he could well have still stood a big chance to get there. So he's fighting this weather, he's fighting these English ships in and out, attacking them, chasing them, one-to-one battles, firing 6 times quicker, while their cannonballs are getting stuck and jammed. Just absolute chaos. So all of that together, but I keep coming back to this idea about the weather has led to everything else. Okay, so maybe keep that in mind as its own little paragraph, but especially when you're explaining why the Armada failed, this is why. But English tactics of the fire ships and the one-to-one battles, and then as well, of course, the superior ship designs, all of that plays a part too. Maybe a little bit more luck than anything else. However, the fact that Hawkins did explain to Elizabeth many years earlier, she should think about this, then maybe Hawkins was onto something. Maybe he knew. So that's what's happened at the Battle of Gravelines. Faster ships, more mobile, more direct. The Spanish Armada was essentially then just blown around the coast of England, with less than half of the Armada making it back to Spain, limping home. All sorts of horror stories about the Scottish when they smashed up onto the shores of Scotland and Ireland. The Scottish and Irish felt they were attacked, so they ate some of the Spanish. I don't know if these things are true. These are just the rumours that start spreading around. And that's Medina Sidonia's sort of end, really, of this Armada. And it's really embarrassing for Philip, isn't it, to be defeated by not only a small island like England with a small fleet, but ultimately he's been beat by a woman. And as we know, at the beginning of this course, not many people had much hope for a woman, especially leading. Now, Elizabeth's not on the ships, but she is there and thereabouts. She does deliver a speech at a place called Tilbury, which, if you watch EastEnders, is just on one of the little bends of the River Thames, which really helped to motivate these people to fight harder. And I suppose we're saying there that that would have come into fruition had the Spanish landed in England, to have these battles and defend the country. As it was, they never made it into England in the first place. So that is luck or not. I really think it's a brilliant topic, especially as history goes, when we're trying to think of 2, 3, 4 sides of a story sometimes. That's what history is. What's the right answer? Who knows? Is it the weather? Is it Drake? Is it Hawkins? Is it the fact that the Spanish were poorly supplied? Is it Medina Sidonia? And everything that you say on those things are all correct. You just have to be really brave, don't you, in deciding on your tactic. All right, so this little page now is just a summary of what happened to the Armada, so you don't necessarily do much with it. Just have a little read as we bring ahead this lesson to a close. So it says there, obviously, part 1, they're spotted off the English coast. We send a couple of ships in, and we manage to get 2 of their fleet. Then the second part of it, between 3 and 4, as you can see on the image, we can see the Spanish have tried to anchor, but we haven't allowed them due to chasing them. Then we've sent our cannonballs much quicker. So we've got an advantage. We know that now that's the tactic, to fire on them and get in and out, fire on them quickly. And then obviously we move on to the next bit. The Armada has to anchor off Calais while the Duke of Parma gets his troops ready, because they weren't informed, the communication was poor. So they can't just rock up to the Netherlands. They have to hold off at Gravelines. And that is where then the battle takes place with the fire ships. So lots of things that have happened have led up to these decisions. You can see on this map quite nicely where these little battles took place. And then lastly, the weather was so bad, the Spanish ships were then blown off course. Many shipwrecked, thousands of sailors died. They go right round England and they make themselves back to Spain with the humiliation, and Elizabeth celebrates. And of course, you can imagine the propaganda of this overdrive, okay, which you'll see some examples of in a minute. Okay, so England has won. Elizabeth says this, to quote, "God blew and they were scattered, proving that the true religion is that of our Protestantism." Now that's quite an easy thing to say when you've won, isn't it? You know, a football manager might say, "Oh, I always knew we were going to win. I had a feeling." But the reality is this was so far from anyone's expectation, probably even Elizabeth's as well. So she's taken the opportunity to provide some propaganda in the sense that God clearly is supportive of Protestantism. So everyone in England now, if they were starting to get a bit bored of Elizabeth, or they're starting to think she was being a bit more of a tyrant or a bit of a dictator in these later years, they took this symbol as a symbol from God to the Catholics that were left and the Protestants, that this queen was something special, and basically just to love her and follow her, because God has chosen this outcome, you know, a little bit like the divine right monarchy thing. So that's the propaganda, and actually that is what happened for the last little bit of Elizabeth's reign. So she's got about 15 years left after this, and she gets the boost that she needs because she wasn't very popular as we approach the 90s, remember? So we've had some famines, the economy's not been so great. She was starting to get a little bit maybe stale. So this boost of confidence in Elizabeth has really helped her get the last 15 years of her reign out of the way quite nicely. All right, so that's the next bit of the thing to think about. Let's practice again this interpretation. I'm very keen to keep practicing these interpretations, even though it's for paper 3. It is really good practice for that. So pause the video, have a little read of interpretation 1. What is the view of interpretation 1 relating to why the Armada failed? So your script, remember, is the view of interpretation 1 relating to why the Armada failed is that, and then give the view, and then you'll be able to follow that up by saying, "I can tell this because it says." All right, so read it, have a little think about what this person, this historian, thinks about why Philip failed, and then come back and press play. Okay, so welcome back. Hopefully you worked out here that the interpretation 1 is definitely saying the reason the Armada failed was because Philip's mistakes in the leadership of the thing. He's blaming the idea that Philip didn't take advice from the experts, Medina Sidonia was picked to lead it, and too many soldiers or priests or whatever. Whereas Elizabeth, she took all the advice from the experts, Drake, Raleigh, Hawkins. Hopefully that's quite clear. So you might pick out and say, the view of interpretation 1 relating to why the Armada failed is that Philip chose the wrong people to lead it or didn't take advice very well. I can tell this because it says, and then I don't know, you pick out, he was not only an armchair strategist, but an armchair tactician too. He blah, blah, blah. The final version of his plans depended on success of a tactical edge, which Spain's ships simply did not possess, of the tactics, the clever bit, the leadership. Overall, that's why the Armada failed. And I think probably fair to say you could agree with that. If this was paper 3, you'd obviously get another interpretation of another reason why it failed. But for me, I believe, despite the look of the weather, had Medina Sidonia been a better commander, I think they would have reacted better, especially to the harrying and chasing up the Armada. When the Isle of Wight failed, I think they might well have gone home. But equally, you could equally say that the fact that the weather happened, the fact that they had to put their anchors down because the Palmer wasn't ready and they had to be at the Battle of Gravelines, which led to them being sitting ducks. But then, of course, you could also say that even though that happened, had the English not reacted cleverly and quickly with the fire ships, the Spanish would have just recovered, wouldn't they? Got to the Netherlands and came to England. So maybe sending in those 8 fire ships is really, really vital too. Okay, so just a nice little way to pause this topic before we go on to bringing a bit of an end to it. All right, so as you did previously, pause the video now and go and write yourself a really strong paragraph on why the Armada failed due to English tactics. So because the first paragraph was on the one hand, Spain, this paragraph would be, if it was in your 16 marker, on the other hand. So you're saying to the examiner, here's another reason why it failed, and you're going to say the Armada failed due to the English tactics. So within that, you're going to talk about the harrying, the chasing, the 8 fire ships and things like that, breaking up the crescent shape. write yourself a really strong paragraph, and then when you're ready, unpause and continue with this video, and we'll just bring a bit of a summary to the end, making it look a bit more like what the exam might present the Spanish Armada to you for. Okay, so the significance of this video, of this victory, sorry, is that propaganda. Elizabeth is now stronger than ever. God is apparently in England at least in favour of Protestantism. Maybe to the Catholics they still think that he's a Catholic or whatever, but at least what they're seeing is that God has at least blessed Elizabeth's Protestantism, so everyone can just back off a little bit on the whole religious stuff. She, as we've said, is more popular than ever. England is full of pride, more than ever before. And this victory has encouraged the Dutch rebels, the Protestants in the Netherlands, who obviously they lost William of Orange, didn't they, a couple of years earlier. Their confidence was probably a little bit gone. They've been battered for years through the Spanish invasion. They could see that it's possible for a smaller little force to beat this mighty Spain. So they were much more confident in fighting. So that's helped the Dutch. The strength of the English Navy is now in no doubt. We know that the English Navy is good. We know we've been beginning to plant some seeds over in the Americas with Virginia, and also this naval victory. Basically, England's now a little bit more respected as a seafaring nation on the Navy, meaning people might be less likely to invade, but also encouraging people to trade with the English fleet and allowing us the confidence to go all over the world, not just Americas, but over to the East, all of which will prove the British Empire the root of that. Also following the Armada, as much of it being an absolute humiliation for Philip, Spain's power is declining. It was a really costly expedition. The Armada, of course, with Philip losing lots of money to Drake, stealing 400,000 and so forth. But Philip did continue to fight against Protestantism for the rest of his life. This counter-reformation, obviously that's his motivation. I don't think it mattered who was in charge of England if they were Protestants, but that continued. There was a couple of other armadas in the 90s, I suppose, but never to the scale of this, and again equally as unsuccessful, otherwise you'd know about it, wouldn't you? So a lot of armadas and maybe some invasions using Ireland as a bit of a springboard throughout the 90s, and if you go on to do A-level history and you do the Tudor course, then of course you'll pick this up and do the later part of Elizabeth's reign in there as well, which is equally as interesting. So that's the significance of the victory for England and Elizabeth, and for Spain and Holland. Overall, everyone is impacted by this massive event in 1588, and really now Elizabeth gets a bit of a clear run to the end, just the odd little skirmish here and there, but she now really starts emphasising this exploration and moving around the world, markets and colonizations. Alright, so that's why the Spanish Armada is so important. So the painting that you can now see on your screen, I've just put Gloriana there, that's the name that Elizabeth gets, but of course she couldn't wait to get this painted, could she? Now the rest of the painting, just underneath what you can't see on the screen, is she has a hand on a globe, and obviously we know in paintings there's a lot of symbolism. That's what she's trying to say, that she now controls the world. She's got a hand on the globe, the crown is there, but even little things like the way that she's facing the calm seas in the first window and the rough seas of maybe the last couple of years, maybe the Armada itself, or just all of the tensions is behind her, and she's facing away, leading England into a bright, calm future. You could be here for hours. If you are particularly into your historical art, looking at all of the things that are in this painting, the jewels, the power, the wealth, all of it, then this is the epitome of propaganda, isn't it? And of course, Elizabeth was right to do that. We've just defeated Spain when we shouldn't have. All right, so you could probably Google a little bit the actual Armada painting and see the bigger version of it, but you get the idea from just this short or small version of it, but really powerful propaganda that travelled around the country, building everyone's confidence and love up for this great queen. Bear in mind, she's getting quite old at this point as well. So she's well into it, nearly her 60s by this point. So this is presenting this queen as still powerful and youthful and ruthless and all of those things that a medieval, early modern monarch needs to be. All right, so just some facts for you. We've got a little fact bank for this, for your revision. So make sure you've got these on your flashcards, any quizzes that you do. Just simply pause the video and write these things down. I'll just put them all on really, and you can see them in the yellow. They're the facts that you'd be expected to include in any essay about the Armada. All right, so please remember the names, the numbers, how many times we can fire, 8 fire ships. You may still be okay with saying that we sent fire ships in, but we're trying to impress our examiners here, aren't we? So we want to be saying 8 fire ships. We want to be saying that English ships could fire 6 times quicker. We had 24, they had 130, and so forth. So little fact bank is a very, very small fact bank. You could add much more to this. Get your flashcards made, get your head around this topic fully. Okay, and that one there, the only half the Armada returned home, is less relevant, but a nice little fact as well to end a paragraph, I guess. Alright, so this image now that you can see, having completed this lesson, I think it'd be a good idea for you to pause the video. You can see a little bit of dual coding and just add a little annotations around this diagram as to how each of those things have led to the Spanish Armada failing. Just a summary of the whole lesson. Alright, so some bits might be good, some bits might be bad, some bits might be pivotal, some bits might not be. But a nice little sort of infographic really, just to get all of your thoughts on one place, one page. So obviously for Spain, you're going to put something about Medina Sidonia being a soldier, not a sailor, the 130 ships. And although the English fleet of 200 there, they are old, small, sort of fishing boats, I guess, in some cases. So the number's higher, but the quality's not so good. We've got 24 good new galleons, smaller ships, and of course they've done most of the damage. But you can see there's 30,000 soldiers with 20,000 on land for Spain. We've got 14,000 sailors on ships with 20,000 on land. So again, even if we did have to face a land battle, we're probably still going to lose this thing, aren't we? Food is better. You can see the quality. We've got food. We can supply food from England to our ships, whereas the Spanish are stuck with their rubbish barrels and the food going off, things like that. Okay, so our cannons, although we've got a lot less of them, are quicker, 6 times faster. Tactics, we are chasing. The idea for the Spanish is that they want to board ships, a bit like you might expect a pirate battle to be. They need to get really close so they can swing onto your ship and fight you on the ship, whereas the English tactics are more shoot, chase and get away, in and out, and of course being smaller and quicker, we're able to do that. So this is just a nice little pause if you want to, really, if you feel that you want to just consolidate a bit or just think again about getting your knowledge quite secure. And then when you're ready, come back to the video and we'll finish this off. Okay, so how this might look in your exam. We've obviously had a look at a causes question today with a model answer, and you have written 2 paragraphs towards a 16 marker. So it could be quite simply, the best that question for me would be the 12 marker, explain why the Spanish Armada failed. You got a free choice. They'll give you 2 bullet points, but you don't have to do those 2. You can pick any 3 you want. So we're going to do English tactics, Spanish tactics, and the weather. I don't know. English resources. Maybe you put English tactics and resources together. I don't know. You just need 3. Perhaps the weather really should be its own paragraph, because that allows you to bring in Gravelines and the fact that the English reacted superior. The reaction, sorry, was superior to the Spanish. Medina Sidonia being a poor leader, whatever, anything like that. Question 1, it could be any of those things. Describe one feature of Drake's attacks on the Spanish shipping and trade. Describe one feature of the English Navy. The Battle of Gravelines, Cadiz, it could be anything. And then the 16 marker, again, 3 really strong paragraphs in the middle of this thing, but with a statement, being in this case, English tactics were the reason why the Armada failed. Do you agree? You have to do English tactics, and then you maybe do Spanish tactics, which is what you've written here, and your 3rd paragraph could be something about leadership, communication, weather, whatever. But you keep comparing to tactics in this case. Of course, between now and June, for the end of your exam, ready for your exam, you can do all these questions just as some revision. But there are obviously anything that you do, if you do in your exam booklets, have a look at the Elizabeth questions, but hand them in, get them marked. Just make sure you are really secure on these big topics. So that's Drake, relations breaking down, the Netherlands and the Armada, and pretty much you could answer almost any question really. Okay, so with that in mind, let's bring this to a bit of a head. Some revision tasks for you to do as well. If you're struggling with some ideas, just watch the video, and if you are especially watching it as a revision video rather than for the first time, there's some little ideas to do there. That'd be quite nice to do in your 25-minute chunks of revision. Okay, so a little summary from our textbook, as always, just to give you a bit of a checkpoint to look at and some questions. However, as a lesson goes, a strong lesson, a good lesson, really interesting. Hopefully you found it interesting to see how this whole thing happened, how England won. Remember, all of our lessons are also available on our website, stchistory.com. You know that now. So watch the videos, and if you are on a revision program now and you're watching these videos, these lessons as revision, then all the better. Hopefully they're bringing some bits back to you from when we did it in class. Remember that medicine, Germany and the Cold War, they're also on our website as well. So thank you very much, and hopefully you found this useful. If not, just let us know and we'll try and fix up some confusions that you've got. Okay, so thank you very much, and we'll see you for our next lesson online. Goodbye.